My daughter invites my ex-husband's mistress to her graduation instead of me when I refuse to sell a family heirloom to pay for her college. But my father-in-law brings the karma she deserved for being spoiled. Hello, I'm a 45-year-old woman writing this post today to seek advice on a situation that occurred with my daughter Zoe, who's 19. The issue is quite complicated, so I'll start with some context to clarify things. I had my daughter Zoe when I was 26 with my then husband. Let's call him Stan. Stan and I met in college and got married after we graduated. He came from a family of business people who were quite well off, to say the least. His mother had been a victim of cancer and had passed away when he was young, leaving his father to raise him alone. My father-in-law, Mark, 65, always treated me like his own daughter and even defended my cause in front of his own family at times. After Zoe was born, things got worse between Stan and me, with him barely staying home. When Zoe was 3, we were on the verge of divorce, but Mark put us in couples therapy, and we managed to make it work. However, things had changed drastically. It felt fake, like a version of us that wasn't real. The time leading up to the divorce also took a toll on Zoe. So Stan and I decided to remain civil with each other and make our marriage work for the sake of our daughter. She grew up in a home with 2 parents who loved her dearly but didn't love each other. Stan was running the family business and I worked as a graphic designer. Both of us contributed to the household, so Zoe never felt any financial struggles. By the time she was 17, the arrangement between Stan and me had hit a bump, with him revealing his 5-year-long affair with his secretary. That woman had been with us for nearly 10 years, and her betrayal felt like a betrayal to the family. This caused a lot of drama in our home, with Mark nearly cutting Stan out of his will. I decided that day to separate from Stan and finally file for divorce, as I was too tired of keeping up the charade. Zoe didn't say much, but she surely felt the weight because she was the one who had to switch houses every weekend, living mainly with her father and his mistress since their home was closer to school. I tried to do what I could to make things easier for her, from providing her with the best of everything to making sure we didn't argue whenever she saw Stan. In her final year of high school, she decided she wanted to join the family business, just like her father and grandfather. Mark had secretly told me that he planned to open a new company in her name and hand it over to her once she graduated from college. She worked extremely hard throughout that year and managed to get into a good university. She didn't qualify for any scholarships or financial aid and expected us to pay, which I was willing to do as her mother, covering half of the tuition, while Stan would cover the other half. During this time, Stan's mistress announced her pregnancy. I had started saving, and after gathering funds from my other savings, I managed to pull together 50%. There was an incident during her senior year that led to some distance between us, so as I mentioned, I paid extra attention to being there for Zoe after Stan and I separated. Zoe plays the piano excellently and had a senior talent show. It was a weekday, so Stan and I decided to attend. On the day of the event, I got stuck at work for some reason and called Stan to ask if he was at Zoe's recital. He told me that he was at the hospital with his girlfriend because her doctor's appointment took longer than expected, and he thought it was okay since I would be there. I panicked and called Mark to see if he could go to the recital, but he didn't answer his phone either. Both Stan and I left our situations as quickly as we could and arrived at the end of the show. Zoe had won, but there was no family there, so we found her on her way home alone. When she saw us, she got into the car in silence, and we tried to ask her about it, to which she responded rather rudely, which was understandable. As I was about to drop her off at Stan's house, she made a comment about how it was fine for him to be late since he was caring for the mother of his child, while I prioritized work over my daughter. This hurt me a lot, but I didn't say anything. I told her I would make it up to her and took her to lunch at her favorite place that weekend, but I don't think things were the same between us after that. After her finals, she came to stay at my place for a long vacation, as Stan's mistress was pregnant and needed more space. One afternoon during lunch, she asked me if I was going to pay for her college, so she could give me a detailed list of expenses. I told her I was going to pay for half of her tuition, considering that her father would also contribute his share. She said that with a new baby on the way, it was obvious her father wouldn't be able to pay such a large amount. This stressed me a bit, and I told Zoe I didn't have that kind of money and that it wasn't fair for Stan to practically ignore his first child just because he was having another. She responded that she was okay with her father not being able to pay and that she had no resentment toward him or his girlfriend. She practically begged me to find a way to help her pay, or she'd have to take out a student loan. I suggested that a loan was a good idea, but she got upset and left. I think she expected me to pay for everything instead of her taking out a loan. I thought I should give her the space she needed and didn't initiate a conversation with her for the rest of the day. The next morning, Zoe was gone, so I called her and learned she was with a friend and would be back soon. She returned around lunchtime, looking very excited. When she approached me, I asked her the reason for her excitement, and she proceeded to place a necklace on the table. The necklace she laid down was a blue sapphire necklace that belonged to my late mother. We weren't wealthy, not even well off when I was growing up, and this fairly expensive necklace, which had been passed down in our family since my great-great-grandmother, was considered a good luck charm. I asked Zoe where she found the necklace, and she said it was in the attic with my mom's other things. She said she had a friend check the necklace and realized it was worth a lot. She then said that she could now pay her tuition in full by selling this necklace. I was shocked by her statement because this was something that had been passed down to me and had been in my family for generations. It seemed strange that my own daughter, who would inherit this in the future, would want to sell it when it wasn't even necessary. I looked at Zoe, seeing how excited she was. But I decided to break her enthusiasm by telling her there was no way I was selling this family heirloom, as it held sentimental value. She argued that it was pointless if it couldn't help her, but I responded very firmly that no, and I wish there wouldn't be any further discussion about it. She got upset and stormed off to her room, and when I went to check on her, she was packing her things to stay with her father. I tried to convince her it wasn't necessary to leave, but she had already made up her mind. Zoe's graduation day was approaching, and I obviously expected to be invited to the event at the school. But what I received was an invitation to the post-graduation party hosted at Stan's house. I thought it must have been a mistake, so I messaged Zoe, but she said the school allowed only one parent, and she was taking her father, which I accepted with little enthusiasm. Later on graduation day, I was hurt to see a post from Zoe on Instagram featuring photos of the ceremony with Stan and his mistress. I decided to just go on with the day and not make it about me. The graduation party was very ordinary, as if nothing had happened. Mark came to comfort me for not being invited to the graduation ceremony, but I dismissed it, saying I was sick and couldn't attend. When it came time for the speech, Zoe took center stage and began thanking everyone. She talked about how her future stepmother was a good luck charm and the reason for her success. She continued talking about Stan and his new family, and I thought she might mention me, but the speech ended without any mention of me. I was devastated by this, and Mark could see on my face how upset I was. Immediately, he went to talk to Zoe and left a few minutes later after what seemed like a heated argument from a distance. Then, Zoe came up to me and asked if we could talk privately, so we both went to her room. I thought she wanted to apologize for everything, but she started yelling at me, blaming me for ruining her special day, because her grandfather Mark had confronted her for not giving me credit for her success. When she said that Mark shouldn't interfere when he didn't know the whole story, he responded that he knew everything and left. She continued to call me a gossip for having exposed her and ruining her relationship with him. I told her I hadn't been the one to reveal our conversation, but she wasn't willing to listen and asked me to leave as soon as possible. I was devastated by all of this and left after composing myself. Later that night, I received a call from Zoe, crying and asking me to come to Stan's house as soon as possible. I got a bit tense and drove immediately to their house. I arrived and saw Stan, his mistress, and Mark sitting on the couch with Zoe standing beside them in tears. I asked what was happening and learned that Stan had called Mark the day Zoe went to his house after our argument, asking him for some money for her college or to convince me to pay the full amount. Mark was furious with Stan for using me just because he didn't want to pay for his own daughter and scolded him. Since that day, the two haven't spoken again. After Zoe didn't mention my name and gave a stupid excuse for it, Mark was pushed to his limit and told Zoe something she didn't want to hear. But first he asked me to tell him the truth about what had happened between Zoe and me. I told him everything, and he was horrified, as I was, thinking about selling a family legacy when it wasn't necessary. Then he stood up and proceeded to scold Zoe for treating me that way, and then pulled out the business papers he had planned for Zoe, which was going to be her graduation gift. He talked about this, and then tore them up in front of everyone, saying that he had been wrong in his judgment of Zoe being a good girl and that he would no longer indulge her. Zoe began crying hysterically, begging Mark not to be so harsh with her. Mark then turned to me and asked me not to give Zoe the money I had saved for her college, as she needed a reality check after behaving like a spoiled child, and left without listening to anyone. Zoe then began begging me to convince Mark to give her back the future business, while Stan and his mistress continued to blame me for causing all this mess. It was all too much to bear, so I told Zoe I would think about it and went home. Now it's the next morning, and my phone is flooded with messages from Stan and Zoe asking me to talk to Mark and resolve the issue. I'm quite stressed and thinking about calling Mark to have dinner tonight and discuss the matter, but I still don't feel it's my fault. So, am I the bad one for not selling my family legacy for my daughter's college money and perhaps ruining her future? Update 1. First, I'd like to address some questions raised about the original post. Why couldn't Mark pay for Zoe's education? Although Mark is a wealthy person, he believes that people should work and earn their place. So he wasn't willing to pay for Zoe's education, but he was willing to give her a business after she graduated. Stan wasn't as rich as his father but was comfortable, as I mentioned. He was saving his money for his new child and family. Regarding the relationship between Zoe and her future stepmother, I don't like Stan's mistress because she hurt me, but she has always been kind and affectionate with Zoe until now. Zoe didn't like her at first when Stan and I decided to divorce, but over the past few years, they have developed a mature stepmother-stepdaughter relationship due to their dysfunctional childhoods with separated parents. But moving on to the update, I spoke with Mark about what had happened and whether such a severe punishment, not giving Zoe the role in the company as well as not paying for her college, was fair. Mark made it very clear that there was no way Zoe would have appreciated any of that, and it was evident from her behavior at the party. He was disappointed because not only did she act as if she deserved everything, but she didn't even show a hint of intent to achieve it on her own. It made me realize that I was free to give her the money I had saved for her, but I shouldn't expect the same from him and shouldn't complain in the future if Zoe decided to abandon me for her new family. Mark assured me it wasn't my fault and left. After he left, I called Zoe and informed her that her grandfather wasn't willing to give her a role in the company unless she achieved something on her own. She became upset upon hearing this and started cursing me again, blaming me for everything that went wrong. It escalated to the point where Stan had to snatch the phone from her to make her stop. The behavior during this call has made me reconsider my decision to pay half of her college tuition. The next day, I heard from Mark that he had been in another big argument with Stan, who was blaming Mark and me for making Zoe miserable and treating her unfairly. Mark reminded Stan that he could also pay for his daughter's college, but he was the real neglectful one in the situation. Mark made sure to remind Stan that he was still part of the company Mark ran and could be fired if he didn't stop blaming us. Stan quickly fell silent after this and barely defended Zoe. Even his mistress tried to convince Mark under the pretense of how family should be treated, but Mark asked her to pay for Zoe instead, which she instantly refused to do because she wasn't financially well off. I tried calling Zoe after our last conversation to see if she was okay, but apparently I've been blocked from calls and all social media. So now, I think it makes sense not to pay for her college. Update 2. It's been a week since the last update, and things have been quiet. I no longer feel guilty for not helping my own daughter with her education because I've realized that giving in to her demands would only encourage that behavior. So, I remain firm in not helping her financially. This update is about what happened afterward. As I mentioned before, Zoe was devastated to learn that she would have to take out a student loan and might not be part of the family business. I've heard that Stan's girlfriend has been her support throughout this. Mark, after a few days, was also quite disheartened by losing his granddaughter over money and decided that life was too short to hold grudges. He still wasn't going to help her financially or in any other way, but he wanted to have a conversation with her to explain what went wrong. She agreed to meet with him and they had lunch together, but the meeting didn't go as expected. The conversation was going well until Mark asked why she hadn't invited me to her graduation ceremony. Zoe, in an attempt to persuade her grandfather, fabricated a whole story about how she had begged me to pay half of her tuition and had asked about the necklace to make things easier for me. She claimed that instead I had mistreated her, and despite that, I'd still been invited to the graduation, but had chosen to decline the invitation and was now playing the victim in the situation. Mark is a smart man. He listened to her story but decided to verify it with me later, which is how I know this story. When Mark asked me about the rejection of the invitation, I broke down, thinking about how far she had gone just to belittle me. I told him the truth, and also showed him the chats, which she must have forgotten before lying, making it clear that I was deliberately not invited to her graduation. Mark was extremely disappointed by this, and called Zoe to let her know that they would not have a relationship from now on, until she stopped her habit of lying. I also decided to send her a message from Mark's number telling her that I didn't want to have contact with an ungrateful daughter like her. I received some messages from Stan's girlfriend calling me names for abandoning my own daughter and ruining her relationship with her family, but I just blocked her because I knew she wasn't worth my time. Update 3. I didn't think things would escalate to this level and that I'd have to write an update so soon. After Zoe's conversation with Mark, she realized that the only way to gain sympathy in this situation was to create a false narrative and spread it. She used her TikTok account and posted some videos about how I was a toxic mother, manipulating many situations from her childhood to paint me as the villain. She even went so far as to say inappropriate things about my relationship with Mark. I'm not on social media, so I learned about the situation from a colleague who followed my daughter. At this point, the boundaries had been crossed, so I decided to inform Mark about this and wrote an email to Stan, his girlfriend, and Zoe, saying that if they didn't remove the videos as soon as possible, I would sue them for defamation. My colleague assured me that I had nothing to worry about since the posts barely had any views. Mark, realizing what had happened, decided to send a similar email to Zoe. Later that night, I received a call from a distant relative, asking me about my situation with Zoe, and technically blaming me for not keeping my daughter safe. I asked how they knew about this, and that's when I learned that the TikToks had gone viral in our community. I decided to install the app to see what people were saying, and my reputation was being destroyed in the comments, with Zoe liking the most vile comments. My phone and email were also bombarded with hateful messages from some people I knew, and some strangers. I couldn't believe how vile my own daughter was being, and I decided to sue her and Stan after all, but not before posting my version of the story. I posted some videos telling my side of the story with evidence, which attracted much more attention than I had expected. People on the internet were now siding with me, and due to all the redirected hate toward her, she thought it was better to send me a message asking if we could resolve things in person and for me to delete the posts. I was enraged by her assumption that I would follow her request and told her to have Stan meet me the next day at her father's office. Mark and I had talked throughout this and decided that we would sue Zoe and Stan, as her guardian, for defamation since we had suffered enough, and all this negative tension was also affecting Mark's business. The next day, Stan showed up with Zoe at Mark's office. Mark had his lawyer by his side and told Stan and Zoe that we were going to sue them both for defamation. Zoe went crazy at the prospect of actually going to court over her insignificant videos and immediately deleted the TikToks she had posted, hoping to erase the evidence. But when Mark showed her screenshots of the videos, she began crying crocodile tears, begging him not to do this and not to ruin her future. Stan even tried to shame me into withdrawing the case, but I asked him not to interfere, especially since he hadn't stopped the fiasco in the first place. Honestly, this has been extremely exhausting, and coming from your own daughter is even more devastating. So, I've decided to stay off social media for a while, and will read the comments when I return from my internet break. Update 4. I'm writing this update after a few months, since the last time a lot has happened, especially with Zoe. Since this happened right before a long weekend, we decided to file the case the following Monday. On Saturday, I received a call from Mark asking me to come to Stan's house immediately. I rushed over there, and what had happened was nothing short of terrifying. After the last time we spoke with Stan and Zoe about the case, they both went home and had a heated argument. This affected Stan's girlfriend's health, who had to be taken to the hospital due to difficulty breathing. She and the baby were safe, and after a checkup, she returned home. Zoe felt guilty for putting her health at risk, so she tried to apologize to her but ended up in a very nasty fight with Stan's girlfriend. Stan's girlfriend asked Zoe to give her some space, but Zoe wanted to hear that her apology had been accepted and kept bothering her. This led to her getting very upset, and things got out of control. Before Stan could intervene, the fight became physical, with Zoe pushing Stan's girlfriend in anger. Fortunately, Stan intervened. Realizing what she had done, Zoe ran to her room crying. She came down a few hours later and was surprised to see us all there. She knew this was because of what she had done and immediately apologized to Stan's girlfriend, admitting that her behavior was inexcusable. Stan then spoke and asked her to leave his house as soon as possible, as he still considered her a threat to his pregnant partner and their unborn child. Zoe tried to apologize again, only for Stan's girlfriend to make it clear that this was the only option being given to her. Seeing what Zoe had done, she had brought this upon herself. Mark offered Zoe to stay with him for the time being, which she accepted since she had no other option. After Zoe went to pack her things, Stan began to cry and asked his father to withdraw the case we were planning to file. He mentioned that he didn't want to get into legal trouble and would like to disassociate himself from Zoe if that was the price of his freedom. Both Mark and I looked at each other in shock and waited for Stan's girlfriend to say something. All she said was that none of this was their fault, and she completely agreed with Stan. Mark didn't respond to Stan after this and left with Zoe once she came downstairs. The next day, I received an apology message from Mark's number. It was Zoe. She said her grandfather had told her everything about how her father wanted to disinherit her, and she realized too late that I was the only parent who truly cared about her. I didn't forgive her. That night, I called Mark, and we both concluded that moving forward with the defamation case against Zoe wasn't a good idea, as it wasn't worth all this stress. We decided to let Zoe go on one condition. She had to publicly apologize on all social media platforms to Mark and me, to which she agreed immediately. In the post, she also declared that she was cutting off all contact with her father and his girlfriend. Stan, realizing that the case had been withdrawn, tried to call Zoe hoping to apologize for suggesting the idea of disinheritance. But Zoe, instead of tolerating it, let out all her anger and told him everything, from how he had deceived her to how he had abandoned her. He had nothing to say after that, and their relationship ended. She came by my house before leaving and profusely apologized for everything that had happened. I told her I couldn't forgive her because our relationship had been through too much. Currently, Zoe has found a job near her university campus and is going to therapy for her mental health issues. I haven't been in much contact with her. Mark also talks to her only occasionally. Update 5. Well, I have news for all of you, if you're still interested in my story. If not, this will be my last update. Mark has finally decided to remove Stan from the company. He told me this a few days ago when we met for lunch. He informed me that he took his time finding a suitable replacement for Stan's position, and seems to have found the right replacement for his son. After careful evaluation, Mark decided to promote someone who was already working in the company in a lower position than Stan's. This employee has proven to be highly competent and has been prepared to take on greater responsibilities. Mark believes this change will benefit the company in the long run as well, so it's not just to teach Stan a lesson or anything like that. The official announcement will be made at the end of the month, and I'm not sure how Stan will react. Knowing the situation, I don't think he will take this change well. However, Mark thinks it's the best for the company and his family because he feels he raised a son with entitlement instead of a leader who could take the company forward. Update 6. I'm back to update on Stan's reaction, as many have asked me to do so in the comments. The news that Mark had decided to remove Stan from the company was a devastating blow to him. Since Mark communicated the decision, Stan has been in a kind of downward spiral. At first, his reaction was one of disbelief and anger. He felt it was unfair to be stripped of his position at such a crucial time, just when he was about to become a father. Stan has been reaching out to everyone, from close friends to industry contacts, pleading for them to intercede on his behalf. He called Mark several times, asking him to reconsider his decision, but Mark has remained firm in his stance. He has made it clear that the decision is final and non-negotiable. According to Mark, reversing his decision now would show a lack of leadership. Stan believes it was unfair of his father to do this, especially as he is about to become a father again. But Mark told me that none of that matters because over his years of work, he has managed to save quite well, and if he hasn't, it's not Mark's fault. I partly understand this since, if I with a simple job could save for Zoe's university, even though I didn't end up spending my savings, he could have done the same. In recent weeks, I have also received multiple calls from Stan, presumably asking for my help, but I haven't answered. I don't want to be caught in the middle of this conflict. Everyone knows I've been in more conflicts than I would like, so avoiding this one is best. Additionally, he has tried to contact Zoe, our daughter. Stan asked her to talk to Mark and me to see if she could find a way to reverse the decision. Zoe has refused to help him. Zoe has mentioned that she doesn't want to help someone who abandoned her at her worst time. For my part, life has begun to return to some sort of normality, though it's not easy to return to normal after all this. The truth is, I haven't spoken much with Zoe since everything happened. Our relationship remains complicated. Although she has apologized and shown remorse, I'm not sure if I'm ready to fully forgive her. The wounds are still fresh, and I think I still need time to heal. But even if I heal, I will need even more time to forgive, if I ever do. I've been considering seeking therapy to help me cope with everything that has happened, but I'm still contemplating it. As for Mark, he has been relatively calm since the last update. He has continued with his responsibilities at the company and has tried to stay focused on the future. I suggested he consider opening an account here to share his own story about how he has handled the situation with Stan, as it might be interesting to hear his perspective. However, Mark has expressed that he is not particularly interested in sharing personal details publicly. Still, I remain hopeful that I can convince him. In any case, this will be my last update.